to the next edition of Reclaiming My Mind. I am your host, Jessica Vaughn, and tonight I have with us another City Council candidate. How exciting is that? Today we have with us John Godwin. Hello, who is running for in District 2, which is citywide. Anybody can vote for him who lives in Tampa city limits, so it's not specific to your district. And he is here today to talk about his candidacy. Welcome, John.
Jessica, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me, and I'm so happy to be able to speak with all of your listeners.
Yes, thank you. I have gotten so much feedback from so many different people. So glad that we're doing these interviews and that people have a chance to really find out without going to forums what the candidates are passionate about and their platforms. So I really owe it to every candidate that drives out here and consents to doing these interviews. So thank you for being here and to all the candidates who have been here so far.
It's such a nice opportunity because at the forums, what you tend to do is get a minute opening statement, answer 3 questions and a minute response, and then a minute closing. So you have 4 minutes, and I don't feel like anybody really gets to know you in that time. And it's really how quick are you on your feet instead of how substantive are you on policy.
Yeah.
So I like these exchanges.
Plus, don't you have like people who ask questions and then you have to go down like a line and maybe the person before you already took your answer? That's a lot of pressure sometimes if you have similar policies.
Yeah, I forget who I was in a forum with the other day. Oh, Joe Robinson, my opponent, actually. One of my opponents. And I have a lot of respect for Joe Robinson. And he answered a question, and it was exactly the way I was jotting down how to answer it. So, you stand up and you say, I agree. Not much to add. And
yeah, it's frustrating.
It's nice to be giving this long form, really detailed responses.
Well, not too detailed, I hope. But anyway, let's move on. So the first thing I like to do generally is find out about the candidates. And I'm surprised. I always give people a wide range to tell me about themselves, and people kind of give me 1 or 2 brief snippets and then they jump into their political career. But I want to know about you. So tell me about your background, about your childhood, about your family, whatever you want to share that tells us a little bit about John and not just the candidate.
Yeah, and I understand why people jump straight into the policy. That's honestly where I'm most comfortable.
Sure.
I'm a lot more comfortable talking about policy than myself. But at the end of the day, what I really view myself as is the policy. That's what I spend my waking hours looking into. But, starting off kind of at the beginning, I was born and raised over in Orlando, but my family actually moved to Tampa back in the early 70s. Oh. So Tampa is where I spent every weekend of my childhood growing up. It's where I learned how to fish, build tree forts, arm wrestle, all of that.
Arm wrestle.
My grandfather, we called him Fa-Dad. He was a very John Wayne type person. Oh. Had that persona. So it was always kind of like how rough and tumble can you be?
Interesting.
So he liked to arm wrestle me a lot. Or trade punches, or who can sing the lowest and all that. But he was always my idol growing up. But I guess a little bit before that, and kind of one of the big formative experiences of my childhood was I caught a childhood illness when I was 18 months old. Oh. And through the treatment ended up going wrong, and I ended up being hospitalized for weeks. Wow. And I became paralyzed, and I went mute, and I went deaf for a stretch.
Oh my goodness.
So, in that 18 months, that's a point in your youth, in your developing years, where you're learning how to walk and talk. So afterwards, I had to relearn all of that. Wow. And what it meant was, throughout my childhood, I was in speech therapy classes, basically until high school. I was going into speech therapy. And of course, with my speech impediments, it meant that the children interpreted that as me being gay. And this was the 90s, where being gay was the worst thing you could be, in society.
Probably not the worst thing, but yes.
I faced that ostracism, and it was partnered with a lot of learning disabilities that came with having to relearn everything. So I was in remedial classes throughout elementary school. Wow. And missed my recesses, missed my PEs, all of that, as teachers, amazing public school teachers, took their break time to work with me more. And I appreciated that because I was so angry that I was in remedial classes, but it also was just one more separation that there was.
Sure.
And I think a lot of these separations are kind of where, to skip back to policy a little bit, since that's where I'm comfortable, is where when I talk about inclusivity a lot. And it's where a lot of my professional career I've devoted to trying to serve and help marginalized populations, because when I look back at my childhood, it wasn't a heck of a lot of fun.
Sure.
So I think we can do better, and I'm so excited about where we are as a society compared to where we were 20 years ago. But I think that there's a lot more headway we can make. But, kind of over the years, I was able to get out of the remedial classes. I was able to get into regular classes and eventually into honors and AP and whatnot. But I kind of had another earth-shattering type of occurrence with Fawdad, my grandfather I mentioned. He passed away when I was a freshman in high school.
I'm sorry.
And it was hard because when you have somebody you idolize that much, and he was everything. He was who I kind of viewed as who I was supposed to be when I grew up. And then he suddenly passed away, kind of completely out of the blue, at least for me. And I had a complete crisis of consciousness, a crisis of faith, not understanding what the meaning of life is, or what I was supposed to do. And luckily, again, it was public school teachers who kind of stepped up and helped me through it. I had a English teacher, and I guess this is where I get a little bit nerdy, but she had me reading a ton of different things, different poets and authors from history that talk about the meaning of life and whatnot. And one of them was Longfellow, and he has a poem called The Psalm of Life, and a passage in it is, "Lives of great men remind us you can make your lives sublime, and departing leave behind us footsteps in the sands of time." And I think that was kind of the way, I suppose I interpret it as some sort of immortality. If you can make an impact, then death is less scary.
That's pretty deep.
And it resonated with me, and I think that's kind of, in the time since, what I've really been trying to do. What I've really been trying to do is see how much good I can do during this time I'm here on Earth. How many people's lives can I genuinely make better, even if it's by a little bit.
Right.
So yeah, that's kind of my personal philosophy, I suppose.
And then you married your beautiful wife, who many of us have the honor of knowing because she's delightful.
Yeah, she's Catherine is my amazing, amazing wife. We met while we were undergrads at college at Auburn University in Alabama. She's from Southern Alabama, she has her whole own interesting,
Sure.
backstory of being, slightly to the left of Marx and growing up in Southern Alabama.
Right.
But we met, and as undergrads, we were both in basically campus leadership of every organization there was, and crossed paths there. We actually didn't start dating until I went to grad school, though. She was dating one of my best friends before that.
Wow.
So that a little scandal. But then, yeah, we started dating when I was in grad school, and then I was in grad school at Florida State, and she came to Florida State also. We got engaged at age 22 and married at 23.
Wow. And now you have a son and you foster.
Yes. So we have a 2.5-year-old son, and we've been fostering for several years now, and we've had 12 children come through our home, 12 foster children. We just last week, the foster child who we had for the longest period of time, and most recently, she was reunited with her family.
Wow.
She was with us for 15 months.
Yeah, I've met her. She was nice.
She is incredibly amazing. And Catherine and I are still recovering from that a little bit.
It's got to be hard to let him go.
When a child is with you for 15 months and you're playing every bit of the role of parent, and then you get notified that they're going to be reunifying with their family in 4 days.
Right? Bittersweet.
Yeah. So we had basically 4 days to from being told to her moving out. And she was, of course, thrilled. She's incredibly close with her siblings and everything. And you just kind of have to keep remembering how excited she is.
Right.
But yeah, it's, I think we're going to take probably a little bit of a break from fostering, kind of some emotional recovery time.
Mm-hmm. That's a lot of kids that you fostered.
Yeah. And, we're hoping to get back into it, but, some recovery time, trying to take care of ourselves after that real hard experience.
Running an election is taxing, to say the least.
Yeah, and that actually, there was overlap there, and we didn't think there was going to be. 15 months for a foster case is an abnormally long time.
Right.
So when she came and she stayed with us, what we did for the longest time was emergency placements. So what happens is the police show up to a house. Normally it's in the evening when kind of things go down. They reach out immediately trying to find family, aren't able to do so. So it's about 2-3 a.m. that they realize we have to get a placement. So that's where Catherine and I signed up to be that 3 a.m. phone call so that they could bring the children over to us. So then the goal is to kind of sit the child down on the couch, and the child is in such shock that they don't even move. So you're trying to do all the things to comfort them, offer them a blanket, but they can't even bring themselves to put the blanket over them.
Sure.
Or offer them food, because a lot of the times dinner was interrupted.
Right.
They don't do any of it. But what was interesting is Thomas always had his toys all over the house. So eventually that's kind of what broke them out of the complete shock. So, but this is at 3 a.m., but there's no way they can sleep with the shock they're in. So you end up playing with them for a couple of hours with all of Thomas's toddler toys. But they, would eventually love it and feel a little bit more comfortable and then go to sleep. And we would have them for a few days, a few weeks, until a family or a foster placement was able to be found. Right. And the last foster child we had, we were going through that process, and she was just such a great fit for our family and just such an amazing girl. We decided, we asked if, she could stay with us, knowing that the campaign was on the horizon, but it was enough on the horizon where we didn't think it was going to overlap with a typical length of a foster case.
Sure.
That didn't play out that way. But it was an amazing experience.
Oh, well, that's beautiful. Yeah. So you've been fostering. Tell me a little bit about your work, and then tell me why you decided to get in this race, and let's talk about your race.
Yeah. So my work, I work for the U.S. intelligence community, and I am sure I just lost like half of your listeners. But I'm really proud of the work we do. And a little bit of my background, I worked with democracy assistance organizations, organizations funded by USAID, which is our agency for international development, our U.S. agency for international development. And what we did was we trained women in Azerbaijan how to run for local office, or we put handicap accessible ramps and polling stations in the country of Georgia. Different initiatives like this that I'm really proud of. And then when the Syrian crisis broke out, I got recruited by the intelligence community to try and do some of these grassroots, real community building initiatives in Syria. I wasn't very successful in Syria. Obviously, democracy hasn't flourished there. But what we've really started doing is focusing on a lot of humanitarian rights issues, or humanitarian assistance, studying all the border crossings, how we can get humanitarian assistance into countries, studying how refugees can get out of the country, studying the local NGOs, non-governmental organizations, the local humanitarian assistance organizations, trying to foster collaboration, maintaining lists of entities that shouldn't be bombed by U.S. entities or foreign partners, a lot of cultural assets or humanitarian locations. So I'm really, really proud of that. I have a team of 30 analysts who focus on countries in Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. And right now I'm working out of MacDill Air Force Base, which is the second largest economic entity in Hillsborough County or in the Hillsborough region. And is an entity that is frequently forgotten about and is frequently misunderstood. And I'm it's been an amazing experience working in the organization I do. But then you asked
it's a big jump to deciding that you're going to then run for city council. So it sounds like you've got an active family life. You're, entrenched in your career. What inside of you says, now I want to throw more on top of that and run for city council?
As far as throwing more, that hadn't ever really been an issue.
Mm-hmm.
When Catherine and I finished grad school and got married at age 23, we moved up to D.C., and it was 2011, the height of the Great Recession and everything. And to make ends meet, to get our career started, we took unpaid internships. And then to make ends meet, we took second jobs, and I ended up taking a third job. So for much of my adult life, a 100-hour work week was kind of standard. And there was the first year we got married, we ended up filing taxes, and our joint income was $28,000.
Wow!
While we were living in D.C.
That's crazy.
So we lived at the poverty line for quite some stretch. Lived without health insurance for a stretch. So as far as right now, adding a political campaign on top of my career and family life, it was kind of a normal thing to add those additional hours.
Right.
But what I think we also saw was how much opportunity there is in Tampa for us really to bring it to the next level. We are at such a crossroads, have so much opportunity going, so much opportunity lying there for us to really take advantage of. And I think that we really need a generation of leaders who are ready to step up and really be proactive, really come up with new ideas and find the best ideas from around the community and bring it here to Tampa to help us accomplish what we really have available to us.
Right. And what made you decide this race at this time?
So it was natural for Tampa City Council. I think that's really where I could really accomplish a lot of what I want to accomplish. I think that zoning, so many people get onto council and they look at kind of the soapbox aspects of the position rather than the actual job description. And a core part of the job description is understanding zoning. And that's something I really understand. And I understand how we can use zoning to make Tampa inclusive, to make Tampa affordable, to fix our transportation system, a lot of those things. So City Council was a natural and obvious choice. And then there's the question of why District 2. And I guess a little bit of background on how our City Council is structured to answer that is there are 4 races I could have gotten into. We have 3 citywide races, 1, 2, and 3. So listeners, if you live in Tampa, you'll be able to vote on 1, 2, and 3, and then you'll be able to vote on kind of your regional seat. And I live in South Tampa, so I could have gotten into 4. So I started studying those races, and honestly, if you're elected in any one of those, it doesn't change your job description at all.
Right.
So it's just which race you want to get into. And the common approach to it is which race is the easiest to win, which is the most likely to get you there.
Sure.
But I studied it, and I saw where would me being in there create the biggest difference. Because at the end of the day, the goal really was to do the most good for Tampa. And in looking in District 2, I was supremely unhappy with the leadership that we've been receiving there and the incumbent. The incumbent has made derogatory comment after derogatory comment about LGBT populations and voted against trans rights. He didn't support gun control back when that was able to be before the state of Florida preempted us from, I suppose to back up, municipalities aren't allowed to pass gun control now, but he's been in office since 1974.
Right.
So he was in office before that was the thing. And he didn't support passing gun control measures.
So how has he stayed in office? He's just jumped seats every time he's been termed out of one seat?
Yeah, so Tampa City Council is very similar to Hillsborough County Commission in that you're allowed to serve 2 terms. the loophole that there is that a lot of county commissioners have been exploiting, and what he has been exploiting for several decades, is you go back and forth between your regional seat and the citywide seat. So he runs 2 terms in one, 2 terms in the other, back and forth, and that's how he's kind of evaded the term limits that voters tried to put in place.
So is that something we should change?
I don't know. I mean, right now, when I'm running against somebody who's been in office for several decades, and I think that he's harmed Tampa, I certainly wish that he was term limited. Mm-hmm. But I think that there's people like Linda Salsina, who is the longest serving woman in city council history. She served 18 years, I think. And if she ran again, I would vote for her in a heartbeat. She was arguably the most progressive council member we've ever had.
That's what people say.
So what I wish we had instead was a city council race that wasn't in March, that was in November, so that we had more voters and a more engaged populace.
Right.
So that a lot of my opponent's history would get greater visibility.
Sure.
And I think that our March election really hinders voter information. And that's how you can have such bad representatives be preserved. So rather than, and I'm not, honestly, I would have to do a lot of soul searching if a term limits a bill came before me, how I would vote on it.
Right.
I think I would probably vote for it at the end of the day, but I'm not sure. But I think that we would make a lot more progress by shifting our election date and really empowering voters there.
Oh, I agree. Those of us who worked in 2018, to our fingers to the bone, have so little left over for this. And voters too, they get information burnout, like you said. So let's talk about your campaign specifically. Mm-hmm. What would you say is your policy platform, the nuts and bolts of your specific campaign?
Mm-hmm. So you're supposed to do 3 campaign platform points, and I'm not a great politician in that I don't believe in short form, bumper sticker explanations to things. So I went ahead and I did 5. Okay. And it's transportation,
right,
inclusivity, affordability, growth, and neighborhoods. And a lot of that really kind of comes down to fixing zoning in our city. Mm-hmm. So I suppose I could have put zoning on there, but I'm not sure I would have gotten votes.
Probably not.
But as far as, to kind of walk through that with transportation, a lot of people who are running for office talk about fixing transportation and take a transportation first approach to policies. Mm-hmm. If we take a transportation first approach, but we don't fix zoning, what we're going to have is high density developments continuing to pop up all throughout our city and on the outskirts, sprawl. And what will happen is we have to play whack-a-mole with our transportation system, trying to adjust every time a new high-density development pops up. Those developments also have outsized effects on the local infrastructure. So it has an outsized effect on the roadways, but also our school systems, where we're not able to properly target where our schools are receiving this influx of students. Then inclusivity. We can fix inclusivity a lot with zoning also by having affordable housing throughout our city. And that's something that I'm really passionate about. Through zoning, and it gets into the weeds kind of how we can accomplish this, but through zoning we can increase our affordable housing and make sure that it's popping up in each region of Tampa, so that a low-income family is able to send their kid to the best schools in Hillsborough County. And in accomplishing that is really an opportunity to break cycles of poverty if you're providing students with this phenomenal education. And that kind of goes into affordability too, which is my next point. And then you have growth. And with growth, what we see right now is a lot of cities around the United States grow faster than they can keep up with. They end up kind of getting crushed by their growth, or they end up getting whitewashed by their growth, like what happened in Austin. And with proper zoning, what you can do is you can make sure that the growth that does happens towards your urban center. And you can really encourage growth in that urban center and green light growth so that you're doing things like waiving parking minimums, which makes development cheaper to accomplish, but it's cheaper to accomplish exactly in the areas where you want it to be occurring to create a strong, sustainable city. And then the last one is neighborhoods. And you can do a lot to protect neighborhoods by doing stuff like encouraging that growth to occur in the downtown core instead of on the outskirts.
So let me see if I can kind of put in my own words what I hear you saying.
Certainly.
Is that I have a lot of candidates come on and we talk about, what are we going to do about affordable housing, and how are we going to make sure that we're, addressing like systemic racism, and how are we going to make sure that we're prioritizing, neighborhoods equally. And what you're saying is making sure that you're prioritizing through a lot of that can be accomplished by zoning, meaning that you can, through zoning, encourage growth and specific types of growth in certain areas to get that kind of more equitable outcome.
100% true. It's one of the reasons why I always kind of bristle when I hear people say that we have a weak city council, because city council fully controls zoning. And zoning is arguably one of the greatest powers in the city, because you do control all of those most important aspects that we're facing. And I think a lot of people don't see the power in it because they don't understand zoning, or because zoning tends to control what it will be 10, 20, 30 years from now. It's not going to make a lot of changes tomorrow.
Right.
But I think that what we need to be doing is looking ahead, is trying to build this city so that when our sons are adults, it's a city that they want to continue living in, that it's a city safe for them to return to, and a safe, welcoming city. So
let's put some specifics on it. And we're talking about affordable housing because I try to get more specifics in that arena, because it is at the forefront of a lot of people's campaigns. And when I actually ask specifics, I get, maybe we can do this, or we can do some tiny homes, or, we can, possibly do this. And for me, I'm always like, what kind of deal can we make with developers so that they have to prioritize affordable housing in areas? And I get different answers and weak answers. So let's talk specifics. How would you say, with zoning specifically, make sure that we have this affordable? How would we make sure that affordable housing is in areas that are gentrifying or in areas that we want to prioritize?
So first and foremost is something called density bonus system. And I know that some of your previous guests spoke about it. I'm glad that they listened to me on the campaign trail and echoed what I've been saying. But our density bonus system is our way that, say your lot is zoned for 10 units. You're able to build 15 units on it if you meet certain criteria.
Right.
What we have right now is 10 criteria, and you have to meet 3 out of the 10 in order to get that density bonus. One of those 10 criteria is affordable housing. It is the hardest one out of them to meet. So if you're a developer, what you're trying to figure out is what is the easiest for me to meet and what is the cheapest.
Right.
And one of them is set up a bus stop in front of your development. That's infinitely simpler than having affordable housing in your area. So what we need to do is we need to reformat how our density bonus system works so that it's a points-based system. Say it's 100 points. And then what you do is you scale the criteria by how much you want to incentivize it. So what you could do is say affordable housing is all 100 points. We likely wouldn't do that. What we would likely do is set it at perhaps 50 points.
Right.
Then we can, right now, if you develop a LEED certified, LEED certification is an environmental friendliness. You can get, it's one of the criteria. We can amp that up where LEED certified at some points, but then if you put solar panels on top of your unit, you get additional points, so that we're going over to green energy.
Yeah, I like that idea.
And then we certainly still want to ask developers to put a bus stop in front of it, but it's going to get you fewer points. That might be something you add on the cherry on top at the end to get you across the 100-point finish line.
So here's my question. Let's say you figured out how to incentivize developers to do this. How do you get your other city council members to prioritize this as well?
So the reason why it hasn't been passed by city council isn't because people wouldn't support it. Mm-hmm. It's because they don't understand it. Mm. And because I like a lot of our city council members. There's really only one who I have a real problem with, and hopefully we'll have him out in March, and I'll be in. But I think that the problem hasn't been that there isn't the support for it. There's not the understanding of really how to fully redo it. Mm. And I think that I could come up with this plan, and I think there would be wide-scale support. And if there weren't wide-scale support, what we can be doing is putting together a task force, a working group, something to have discussions to tweak the numbers back and forth and find something where there's agreement. Because I'm sure that if we set affordable housing at 50%, we're going to get developers pushing for it to be 30 and residents pushing for it to be 80. Mm-hmm. So there's going to have to be discussions on that. And of course, I'm just pulling all these numbers out. I'm not set on
just
anything.
Using it as an example so people understand.
But yeah, that density bonus system is a core way that we can fix things. And then you did mention tiny homes, and tiny homes are an interesting way of increasing our housing supply, which does decrease costs. But we can also look at that upzoning some of the areas around downtown so that we're also increasing the housing supply that way. And affect affordability with market forces.
Well, that explains a lot. So tell me, is there anything else we'll circle back to it, that are like the nuts and bolts of your campaign that I might be missing at all?
So one other thing that we find a lot is code enforcement issues. Mm-hmm. And one reason why we have a lot of problem with code enforcement is because our city staff has been cut time and time again. We cut taxes back a little bit over a decade ago, and then we had the housing downturn a decade ago. And our current administration has kind of cut staff with relish, and it has hurt our code enforcement aspect. So what we need to be doing is amping that up again. And what we can do with a proper code enforcement department is cut down on absentee landowners, absentee landlords. These are people who buy up property and likely don't even live in Tampa, and they just board it up and they sit on there. That hurts our neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. That hurts our communities, and it hurts affordability. If we clamp down on it, say you can't keep your windows boarded up for more than 6 months, you have to keep your lawn mowed, you can't have chain link fences surrounding the building, all these things, then what you're doing is you're forcing these landowners to put it on the market, whether as a rental or selling it, and that's going to strengthen a lot of these communities. And that's how we can really help out some of our more impoverished areas, is by not letting people take advantage of them.
Now, could that have also a ramification of people in those communities that can't maintenance their yard, only had chain link fences and can't afford to replace them, have boarded up windows because they've broken and they can't replace the glass? Does that also penalize people who are living in poverty?
Yeah, so an important thing that we need to look at is that we're not doing a broken windows type approach to this. Broken windows being a Rudy Giuliani approach in New York to push poor people out.
Sure.
And what we've done in the city in the past is provide city funding for a lot of this facade improvement.
Oh, okay.
And there are programs where we can help them out with that. And what we would really tailor it at are these people who are sitting on investment properties, mm-hmm. and that we're providing assistance to residents. And because that's really what you're supposed to be doing as a city council member and as a city, is supporting your residents,
right,
and making sure that bad actors aren't able to hurt them.
Sure. So this is what comes to my mind is I love these ideas. They're very well thought out, and they make sense. But what people are making it seem like is we're going to be facing a budget crisis soon. Nobody loves me to use those words because nobody wants to make people panic, but that it's a tight budget as it is. When you talk mm-hmm. about things that city councils wanted to accomplish, they've said that there hasn't been the funds for it. And then with bonds coming due, how are we going to manipulate or prioritize the budget so that we can accomplish some of the things that are in your platform?
Yeah, so unfortunately, we do have bonds coming due. Back in 1996, we signed a huge bond deal that the best accountants in town advised against. My opponent voted for that. And what it was a $20 million bond deal that would accrue interest over 20 years and we couldn't pay off anything over that 20 years. So we were accruing interest but not able to make payments. So now we're $100 million in debt on the bond deal, which means a $14 million annual deficit, $14 million out of $1 billion budget. So we have a real problem. Step one would have not been to spend $35 million on a ritzy park downtown. So step one is to be more responsible and not do legacy projects. And that's something that I would do. Right. Step two is that we need to address our income streams, because right now we need to provide services. And it's just that simple. We can't cut services. We can't stop taking care of people in Tampa. So since we can't cut services, we need to figure out how we can afford them. And one thing that we can look at is our impact fees. So whenever a new development is built, how much they have to pay the city on the impact that they'll have on the roadways, on the school systems, on the utilities. Right now, our impact fees are lower than any city of our size in Florida. So we're lower than St. Pete, lower than Miami, lower than Orlando. We can increase this and still be lower. I'd like to be on par. Right. And be able to actually take care of a lot of these things where we're no longer subsidizing the developers. Right now, that's essentially what we're doing. The impact that they have on the roadways, all of us are paying for that. So we're just saying, great, we want you to develop, but you're going to impact all of our infrastructure. Go ahead and throw some money in the pot so that you're covering what that impact is. And we can increase that, and that will help out our budget a fair amount.
It will. So some people would say, and I'm just going to follow my train of thought with this because I imagine some people might have this as well, is, well, then that's going to decrease businesses coming to Tampa if we have higher impact fees. But what I feel like is what will decrease them is not having the infrastructure in the city that we need to develop the talent that they're looking for and the clientele to service their businesses. And that, like you said, it has to be all collectively we're investing in this city with the developers and the city staff.
Yeah, I completely agree. What I mentioned before, a city getting crushed by its own success. And we can't be that city that provides everything so cheap that we can't maintain our basic services. We won't be able to survive that. And when you look around the United States, the fastest growing, the fastest rising cities aren't the cities where the state said, we're the cheapest. You don't have to pay anything. Florida is so strange in that they think that we can win by being the cheapest rather than by being the best. And what you see with other cities, Austin, Seattle, Denver, Portland, these are cities that said, no, we have an X factor. We have something really cool. We're going to make people want to live here. And how our job market works nowadays is people don't have to follow the jobs. These big companies are following the people, especially millennials. Millennials are really, really controlling the makeup of our economy. So if we start saying we're going to fix our transportation system and we're going to encourage public art, that's going to be attracting this young talent to Tampa. And that's how we get the Fortune 500 company. We don't get it by selling out our budget.
I agree. I wish more people understood that. All right. So that's a bit about your platform. We're kind of getting near the lightning round. Did you have anything else you want to talk about, or do you want to talk about some issues?
Let's go to the issues.
All right. So we had 2 listener questions. He looks afraid when I say that. And the first one is, normally we get into it somewhere in between, but I know you'd already commented, but there's, a lot of people who are fighting for $15 an hour minimum wage. We're talking about affordability. We're talking about, all the things that, have to do with how much money our people are making an hour. And the pushback that we've gotten from a lot of city candidates is, again, the budget, and we can't afford to raise city workers up to $15 an hour, and that it would eventually or somehow have, worse impacts on recessive impacts on marginalized communities if we did that. So someone wanted to make very clear whether or not that's something that you support, raising minimum wage, and if it is indeed to $15 an hour, and how you see that working.
Yeah, so I've publicly supported and I've publicly commented that I think all city employees need to be making $15 an hour. I will also talk about city contractors, which I also think need to be making $15
Oh yeah, they mentioned that too, so thank you for including that.
As far as budget and everything, to me, not having the money is an unacceptable excuse for not paying somebody a livable wage. We have a responsibility to our employees, and if we don't currently have the funds to pay them a livable wage to provide the services that we have to pay our residents, then we need to address our income revenue streams. And I mentioned impact fees, but also the administration asked for an increase in the millage rate to a higher level than what our city council passed. I think they used up a lot of our political capital by not doing the full increase at that time.
Right.
So they left us in on a lurch. But that's our problem. That's not the city employees' problems.
Sure.
They're doing their job.
Right.
It's not their fault that our city council didn't do the job. So we can't punish them because we've had a failure of leadership.
Right.
They deserve a livable wage, and we have to pay them that. We also need to do the same thing with our city contractors. And I've heard other candidates talk about it, and I've heard compelling issues where we need to scale it up with city contractors so that so that those businesses aren't laying off workers. And I think that there's truth to that, but we also need to look at the contracts. And one thing beyond a livable wage with those contracts is a prevailing wage. And what a prevailing wage is that the contract you dictate, and the city dictates what it will pay per position. And so that the contractors aren't competing for who can pay their employees the least.
Right.
And what's nice about that prevailing wage approach is that what you typically do is something pretty similar to what union rates are.
Mm-hmm.
So when you release that, you're giving unions an equal shot at business with the city.
Wow. I'm surprised other people haven't been able to come up with ideas that sound so simple when they come out of your mouth, John. All right. Let's also talk about public education, which you don't have a lot of control over in city council. However, I would like to know kind of your stance on public education, supporting it, how you feel about charter schools. And then someone mentioned something about longer days at school that they had heard you say. So I wanted to see if that was still kind of something that you thought was a good idea.
Yeah, so I'll jump into the last part first, since I imagine that's probably what raises most eyebrows.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at the school day right now, it is a school day that works particularly well for a family that has a stay-at-home parent. If there isn't a stay-at-home parent, the child goes to an after-school program. That after-school program doesn't provide the sort of academic support and the sort of love and nurturing it just can't, as a child who's going to a home with somebody there. So you're really growing inequality. You're spreading the gap between families based upon economic status. So yes, I think that a school day should match a work day in length. But now I know that a lot of people are saying, but the kids, like, school is already too long. They're too stressed, and I agree. And that's where,
right,
in the ideal world, we have proper funding.
Sure.
And so I support the longer school day, but I support it with proper funding where you're doing arts, where you're doing entertainment, where you're doing recreational activities. So that would be a 2-teacher classroom, because teachers come in an hour early and stay an hour later. So they're already working over an 8-hour day. So when you have the students there, you're talking about taxing overworked teachers as it is. Oh, well, without a doubt. I mean, what we need is 15 student classrooms. We need multiple teachers. So
this isn't like the ideal public education setting.
So yeah, my long school day isn't something that I think we're anywhere close to being able to accomplish.
Right.
But I think that the long school day is part of the ideal of small classrooms, multiple teachers, teachers being able to specialize in certain areas.
Sure.
And yeah, I think that it also means a longer school year, because low-income students tend to fall furthest behind over summers. So I think that we should be talking about what is our ideal education system.
Right.
Even if it's pie in the sky, we at least need to set those benchmarks.
Sure.
And a lot of those benchmarks, in my mind, is how do we narrow the gap so that children, regardless of the income levels of their family, are getting the full opportunities.
Yeah. I think we should have one of the think tanks with teachers and educators, like you were suggesting when we were talking about setting policy for zoning.
Yeah.
Okay. So that answers the question about the longer days. Tell me a little bit about public education and charter schools, how you feel about those.
So public education, I mentioned before that an integrated community, a community where there's affordable housing throughout, I think is a great way to fix a lot of our education problems, where we get the opportunity to break the cycle of poverty, and we're not doing wealthy schools and poor schools. That will help out a lot. It's not going to fix everything, but it's a really great way that city council members can look to say that they have real impact on education. There's also after-school programs that the city provides that we need to ramp up, and there's basic services that we can help support families, and that'll help with education. But as far as charter schools go, in saying this, I'm going to get a lot of pushback from my family. But I think that charter schools have been a really unfortunate development in the nation. I think I understand why they started up. They started up as trying to be innovation incubators,
so that you could test out public education ideas.
Exactly. Let's remove all the red tape from you, and you try out all these new education approaches. And maybe one of them is going to be the groundbreaking next approach. I don't think that they've been that. Some have been. Some are great.
Sure.
But even with some being great, I don't know why we have abandoned the thought that a public school can be that way.
Exactly.
That we could set up specialty public schools or specialty classes or anything like that to say, let's give them all this funding that we're diverting from public school to really enable them to push the boundaries a little bit and find new ways to do it. And I think that you get more transparency and budgeting with that. You get more equitable expenditure of resources. One of the things that most bothers me about charter schools is that the children who go to charter schools are the children whose parents had the wherewithal, the time to get their child into charter school. So the children that are left behind are the children with the least support network. So I think we need to address that. And I think charter schools hurt Tampa. So I think that one of the questionnaires I filled out, wink, wink, talked about how you would use what sort of zoning approaches you would take with charter school. And I'll admit that I don't think I answered that question particularly well, but it's an area that I don't know as well. But I think that there are ideas like this that we need to be looking into. Is can we be making sure that the charter school system in Tampa doesn't grow further than what it is now? And that would be a good first step, just to make sure that we're taking care of our children.
So I want to go back to the lightning round, and we might have to do a little more lightning about it. But my question is, let's say there are listeners who are listening, and we're talking about inequality and systemic poverty, and for people who don't live in that poverty, who it doesn't affect them, right? Who live out of that poverty. Why is it important for people who are not affected by that poverty to care about and vote for or want to have equitable communities? How would it benefit people who aren't living in poverty for there to be more equality in that regards?
Well, from the most selfish perspective, you can look at my family. My parents never stepped foot in poverty, and my grandparents, at least on my mother's side, were quite wealthy for much of their lives. And then I spent years working 3 jobs and not having health insurance. So if we look at solving these things, it can help out your children, because you don't know when your children are going to graduate high school, if they're going to graduate college or grad school, whatever it be, if they're going to graduate during the next Great Recession. So that's one answer. But then as far it has, from a less personal standpoint, it helps our society. It helps our economy. It makes it so that we're actually more sustainable. So we can certainly create an economic boom by cutting all the salaries of the lowest paid workers. And it will be a solid 2-3 year economic boom until it crashes. The best way to do it is by building up everybody and making sure that even the lowest income individuals in your city have a solid foundation, so that they can be purchasing the goods and services, so that they can be providing the goods and services, so that their children in the classroom are getting the support, so that when they're with your child in the same classroom, it's a really healthy classroom environment. It has so many broad-reaching ramifications, but then you also have people who complain about the welfare state and all. The way that you stop the welfare state is by stopping the need for welfare.
I know. It makes so much sense.
It saves money. Actually, John Huntsman used to be governor of Utah, and he implemented a program that put homeless people in houses. And he said, you know how you don't have a homeless person? You put them in a home.
Right.
And it saved the state incredible amounts of money. And this was a Republican.
Right.
And he approached it from a fiscal perspective. I wish that we could approach it from like, these are people. We should just,
a humanitarian perspective.
But, whatever way you want to approach it, you arrive at the same conclusion that we need to support those in the lowest income brackets of our society.
So I could be wrong about this next question, but I thought I heard really quickly on public radio today that City Council had passed a ban on conversion therapy for the LGBTQ community, and that as of today, a magistrate or someone in the court system had struck down the ban that City Council has done, saying that it's hinging on the freedom of speech and freedom of religion. Yes. So normally I ask, can you tell me a little bit about your stance on LGBTQ and being committed to protecting the rights of those communities? And it seems like I'm stretching, but after hearing that, we're going to definitely be on the forefront of the fight for rights. It's more important not that it was ever less important, but now to talk about, our candidates being allied to that community. So what would you say is kind of your stance on supporting the LGBTQ community?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people kind of got into this mindset that we were a post-homophobic generation. Like there was this idea of post-racial, and we see that we're not there, that you need to continue that fight. One of the reasons I got into this race is my opponent opposed prohibiting discrimination against transgender individuals, saying that it would be too disruptive to sit next to Albert at work one day and it be an Alice the next day. Just horribly bigoted things. And he publicly came out and said he doesn't support homosexuality.
Wow.
So the fight isn't over. And I'm so glad that Guido Maniscalco, one of our current city council members, brought the gay conversion therapy ban to Tampa, even with this lawsuit and even with us having lost this first round. Sometimes even if you're going to lose a battle, it's a battle worth fighting.
Sure.
So I appreciate that. But as far as what we need to do next is we need to improve the health insurance that our city employees get so that it covers transgender health concerns. Right now, that's not covered for our city employees. And then we also need to improve kind of intangible aspects so that it's not just are you safe and protected in the city, you're celebrated. And I think that there's things like we can paint crosswalks with rainbow stripes in areas of town that have predominantly LGBTQA owned businesses. Ybor would be a great example. Paint that with rainbow stripes, and that's a really cool thing. Like, you're a part of this society. Like, you're a part of this neighborhood. Like, we're excited to have you.
You mean when you talk about inclusivity, you actually mean all different marginalized communities and not one that either affects you or that you're extra committed to?
Exactly. And actually, I'm very, very proud. I am the first and only candidate to come out with a plan to make our city more accessible to people with disabilities.
Oh, wow.
And that's something that hasn't been talked enough about.
It's true, it hasn't been.
And that's a core part of inclusivity. So I'll do a quick little plug. If you go to votegodwin.com/access, you'll see my plan. And it's a really, really great plan of things that that are immediately accomplishable. It's not pie in the sky one day type things. These are things that our city can really do that will make it better. And that doesn't just help people with disabilities. Just like when you help people who are in poverty, it helps all of society. Helping people with disabilities helps all of society.
Absolutely.
A wheelchair accessible city is a city that it's accessible with a baby stroller.
That's for sure.
Just thing after thing. It's safer for everybody, regardless of mobility challenges, mental challenges, developmental. All these things are better if we have a more accessible city.
Can I say amen? No, I'm just kidding. All right. So let's also talk a little bit about adult use marijuana.
Yes.
Is that something that you're for or against?
I'm 100% for responsible adult use. I think that it is befuddling that it hasn't already happened. I am very excited that our current city council decriminalized marijuana. My opponent voted against decriminalizing marijuana. He said that smoking marijuana makes you more likely to commit gun crimes. I think that smoking marijuana makes you more likely to eat Cheetos. But I'm really excited that we decriminalized it. The biggest thing that really helped out was our black neighbors, our black residents who were most affected by the criminalization of marijuana. Mm-hmm. Now we're not allowed to legalize marijuana as a municipality, but I think that it's something that we should be pushing for. And I think that we also, as city council members, need to be pushing our county to also decriminalize marijuana. And I think that we have a county commission that should be able to pass it right now.
That's a good idea. How about Medicare for All? Luis Vieira was on, and he's, helping getting all of those petitions signed to expand our Medicare services and get that ballot initiative. How important is healthcare as far as when we talk about healthcare being a human right and Medicare for All as far as you're concerned?
I'm proud to have signed one of those petitions. I am supporting it, and as somebody who went for a stretch without health insurance, I know how scary it is. And I was doing physical labor jobs at the time. Mm-hmm. I did a stretch as a carnival hand when I didn't have health insurance. And, there's scary things without these protections. And at the end of the day, it also saves money.
Right. So having healthier citizens.
Yes.
Okay. What about separation of church and state? How important do you see that as a role in being an elected official?
It's a concept that I'm not sure our country has ever fully understood.
Right.
And it's a concept that is so incredibly important. Up here in North Tampa, we had attacks and threats against our mosques. Mm-hmm. If we have such an incredibly Christian-centric government, how is it that our Muslim population is going to feel comfortable reaching out to us for safety? Exactly. How is it that I pass by a Jewish day school, a preschool, on my way to dropping my son off at preschool every day, and it has police cars surrounding it mm-hmm. because of the threats.
Right.
It's another part of this inclusivity, and if I'm up on council and have a prayer at the beginning of every council meeting, that's alienating, and I don't like that our council does it. I'm fine with our council, and I support our council doing the Pledge of Allegiance at the beginning of every meeting, but I don't really understand why we do a prayer at the beginning of every meeting. If you want to pray on your own before the meeting, then I fully support you doing so.
Right.
But there's a reason why we have that separation.
I agree. And thank you for answering clearly. Let me ask a little bit about workers' rights and unions and how much you prioritize those as far as our society is concerned, and especially when you're talking about being an elected official. The unions have a lot of input on politics and supporting politicians. One of the things I was more surprised about is how active a lot of the unions are in supporting, politics. So tell me a little bit about your support for unions.
I fully support unions. I think that so much of our current work environment is because of unions. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned before about having our city contracts be for a prevailing wage. So it's not just $15 an hour. It's a wage that is equitable, is on par with union wages.
Right.
And this is a great way that we can be ensuring that unions are able to compete so that they can bring their highly trained, highly skilled workforces that have proper protections and proper safety to our city. And that raises the standard for all of the other contractors as well, really makes it a better competitive environment.
How about gun reform? I know we already talked about, and it's hard for city council, because like you said, cities have zero ability. Although I think like county commission Les Miller did some kind of gun reform where he bypassed it. I don't know if it was like,
I'm not familiar with that.
yeah, there was. So I mean, there might be some ways, but in general, where do you prioritize gun reform as importance in your stance on politics?
I don't know that you could ever place gun reform high enough in importance. I was coaching when Sandy Hook happened, coaching high school girls, and I was heading to practice and listening to a psychologist on the radio explain how we're supposed to talk to our children about what happened in Sandy Hook. And she said, tell them that we're doing everything we can to protect them. And I just broke down because I knew I couldn't go and tell these girls that we were doing everything we could.
Right.
Because we're not.
Right.
We're not doing everything we can. And that's where I think that, number one, what I want to do in the city is look into banning weapons and violence on our billboards within certain radiuses of schools and public parks and libraries and all that. And what we can do is set that radius enough where basically it's not allowed anywhere in our city. And then our local gun show won't be able to put billboards up in our city when they come to the state fairgrounds. I think that would be a nice signal, but I think it also would have an impact. I think that in step 2, we need to study what Andrew Gillum did in Tallahassee with banning guns in public parks.
Right.
I'm not sure what the legal framework, why he got away with that, why he won in court. But I think we challenged that. And then step 3, I've gotten permission from my wife to go ahead and take on the state head on and just pass gun control in Tampa. And what that will mean is that the state could come after me criminally.
Right.
And we're ready to do that.
Wow.
And what we'll do is I'd propose some sort of gun control that would hurt them to such a great PR point to come after me, so that even if they do come after me, they end up looking bad at the end of it.
Have you told this to Moms Demand Action?
I have told it to Moms Demand Action. I was at an event with the League of Women Voters tonight. It was bulletproofing our community, and it was an event that Moms Demand Action was also heavily involved in. And I'm a proud member of the League of Women Voters and with their gun safety group, and I try and be at every Moms Demand Action group. It's groups that I'm really passionate about who are saving lives.
I can't talk too much about that because even when I start to talk about Sandy Hook, I start to cry. Even now, it's so traumatizing.
I'm with you.
But thank you. You've been probably the most committed candidate thus far to talking about gun reform. So there's only 2 issues left. Are you excited? You're getting close to the end.
Sounds good.
I know I'm missing 100 million issues, but as far as environmental issues go, we have a very passionate, active Sierra Club here. We have 1 million natural resources that want to be preyed upon by developers. Tell me a little bit about your commitment to our environment and eventually maybe bringing Tampa 100% renewable.
I think it was a tragedy that our administration didn't make that. Our current administration didn't make that pledge, and we need to do so. We need to pass ordinances so that any new municipal buildings that are built have to have solar panels on them. We need to set out plans to retrofit existing municipal buildings with solar panels. Those are key ways where we can start indicating to the solar technology industry that Tampa is a place that they should be looking at. And that's a new industry that we can attract to Tampa.
Absolutely.
Right now, there isn't a solar energy tech hub in the Southeast. That could help our economy so much if we show that public commitment. But then also, like I mentioned with density bonus systems, we can integrate solar energy with that.
Right.
Then I think that we need to be looking at a plastic bag tax. A lot of other cities have effectively introduced plastic bag taxes where it's 10 cents a bag or something like that.
Right.
And it's just enough to spur your mind as you're leaving to go to the grocery store. Oh, I need to grab bags.
Sure.
Worst case scenario, what you see in these other cities, if somebody forgets their reusable bag, they pile all of their groceries into like 3 bags. But it works. The plastic bags hold up.
Right.
but it helps serve as that reminder. And then that tax goes back in and you invest that into protecting the environment locally. So all those 10-cent bags you then are using to clean up the bay or maintain greenways and planting native plants. So that's one of the biggest things that our city is failing at is in our landscaping, we're not planting native plants.
That's for sure.
It requires more landscaping and a lot of them are perennials, so they need to be replanted every year. So it's a waste of our budget too. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then finally, I know we can't be a sanctuary city, or we can, or, you know, but a lot of people are passionate about, you know, kind of the attack on immigration right now and undocumented workers. And, you know, as an elected official, if there was some sort of legislation or some way that we could have some influence or, you know, take a stance on kind of this attack on immigrants right now. How do you see that playing out as far as being a city councilman?
Oh, how do I see it playing out? And this is a hard one. I'll admit it's an area that I don't understand as well as far as how the state of Florida handles it. My understanding is that what typically happens is with non-sanctuary cities that cooperate with ICE. Basically, someone is detained and then the prison system detains them for longer so that ICE can take over. So it's a prison's policy at the end of the day. And my understanding about that is it's completely out of the purview of the city. But I think that when people ask city council members about it, what they really are getting at is inclusivity. Is how do you treat human beings like they're human beings?
Right.
And I think that, you know, as far as an actionable item, that's what we need to be saying is what is your record on inclusivity? What is your plans on inclusivity? And I think that that's something that I hope I've made clear where I am on tonight. And I think that people who come into Tampa, we can't enforce these laws. We have no control over them.
Right.
And we just need to say we don't ask what your citizenship is. You're a person. Let's try and develop great opportunity for you. Let's welcome you into our society and celebrate you for who you are, and not split hairs about what documentation you have.
Right. Well, that completes the lightning round, as it's been dubbed. We've covered a lot of issues. Hopefully, like you said, people have gotten a good feel for where you stand. You're definitely not afraid to take some hard stances on things, and I appreciate that. So tell me, is there anything that we haven't talked about in wrapping up that you kind of want to point out in either yourself or your campaign, or you want listeners to know that we might not have touched on already?
I think one thing that is important is an engaged council member. And when you don't have an engaged council member, you make mistakes like what St. Pete made with their plastic straw ban that really can hurt individuals with disabilities. That was a result of a council that wasn't speaking with communities who had disabilities. And that's something that I really pride myself in is that I'm somebody who is in every neighborhood association meeting, every caucus meeting, every different group, speaking with them. And it's something that I've called for on the campaign trail of setting up these partnerships so that no piece of legislation goes through unvetted by all the different groups that it may impact. Even if me, you know, with the position I am in my life, in my society, may not see it at first.
Right.
So I think that part of engagement and inclusivity is core.
Awesome. So you're reflective.
I would hope so.
So how can people get involved in your campaign? What's the best way that they can help you if they support you, if they love what you're saying, if they want to make sure you get elected against your opponents?
Yes.
One of them being Charlie Miranda.
Yeah, so, I mean, this is where it gets really important. I've been on the campaign trail since basically December 2017. And right now I'm spending at least 8 hours a day on the campaign trail. There's not a heck of a lot more that I can do. I'm giving everything. And what I really need now is I need help.
Right.
And I'm running against somebody who's been in office since 1974. This is not an easy race. If I end up winning this race, it's going to be by 50% plus one vote.
Right.
Luis Vieira got reelected by 76 votes last time. There's
68, I think.
Or 68. You know, fewer than 100. And this is going to be infinitely more close if we're able to pull this off and do good work for Tampa. So I need volunteers. I need people helping knocking doors. And honestly, even with those knocking doors, which I'm really dedicated to doing, we need to reach broader audiences too. And that costs money. I need donations, whether it's $5, $10, whatever you can give, so that we can really make sure that we have leadership, bare minimum that isn't bigoted, but hopefully leadership that really is trying to integrate new ideas. So I would love if individuals could donate or volunteer. You can do that at votegodwin.com. Godwin is just Godwin. And then reach out to your friends. This is so important. Please reach out to your friends, as many as possible. Send out mass text messages. Make your recommendations. Ask for them to call you to ask questions why. And anybody in Tampa can vote for my race. And I got into this race because it was the most important race. So when I say this is the most important race, it's not because I'm biased. I got into it because it is. This is the most important city council race in Tampa right now. So I really need y'all's support.
So do you have yard signs?
I do have yard signs, and I deliver yard signs to folks every single morning. So you can contact me via my website, or you can reach out on Facebook. Honestly, that's the best way. I'm a millennial. You can go to Godwin for Tampa on Facebook, and you'll see my Facebook page, and just message me there, and I'll ask your address, and I can deliver it that same day.
Awesome. Great. Well, I appreciate it. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you. I'm super excited about a lot of the ways that you've laid things out that have been so much more clear than a lot of other candidates have when I've talked about issues. I wish you the absolute best of luck in your race. Thank you so much for being here.
Jessica, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time and really this public service. I think it's so incredibly important. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you so much to all of our listeners. We were going to talk about it more, but quickly, the race is March 5th. So if you have not taken advantage of your vote by mail ballot, which would have come to you if you're registered to vote by mail yet, there will be early voting, which will be open from...
Oh, goodness.
People have told me like 6 times too. February 28th, I want to say, or...
I think it might be a little bit earlier than that, but you can look it up at Hillsborough County Supervisor of Elections. I also have posted it so many times on my Facebook page that I should know it. But then, yes, also March 5th is when it starts. Early voting ends right before March 5th.
Usually the Sunday before.
It's the Sunday before, so that would be the 3rd. But you can do early voting up till the Saturday before, or you can show up on March 5th.
And if you love what you hear, even if you don't vote for anybody else, go out and at least fill out a ballot and make sure that you vote for John Godwin in race 2. And to all of our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. I know these podcasts are long, but I've gotten so much feedback from people saying that they feel so happy just to have access to candidates and learn information. And every little bit of feedback that we get is motivation to keep these late nights and keep doing what we do. So thank you for your comments and your feedback. You can always email me at Vaughn, V as in Victor, AUGHN 30 at gmail.com. Again, thank you for listening. Thanks, John, for being here. And I hope everyone has a great day or evening.